Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching the stream on YouTube or Rumble. I'm very happy to have Dr. Tarik Cyril Amar with me today, and he's my favorite guest, especially when it comes to the European affairs and the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which is, we have been arguing that it's a proxy war. And nowadays we have a major development, and that is a phone call between President Trump and President Putin. It seems they have spoken for over 2 hours, and they have discussed several details, including Ukraine. He said also AI, Middle East, etc. But today we're going to focus on Ukraine. Tarik, thank you so much for coming, first of all, to the show. I know I miscalculated. Guys, I miscalculated the time difference between Germany and Turkey. So we started now a little bit early, like 50 minutes early to the usual time, because this is my bad. In any ways, Tarek, we have this phone call, and many people say this was anticipated, like this type of call between the two presidents. Did you really anticipate that Trump would take such a bold step and open channels with Putin once again? Especially in the context of the European countries really like they are objecting this type of talks with the Russian side.
Look, I don't want to be immodest and say I knew this would happen. I didn't, nobody did. But I thought I was among those who thought it was likely to happen. And at the same time, I understood all the people who argued that it was not likely to happen. You know, there were especially arguments, and very good arguments, about essentially the strength of the bureaucracy or the deep state in Washington, and that ultimately the deep state would call the shots and Trump would just not get to do this even if he wants to.
Yes.
I always thought it was more likely that it would happen. That's simply how it played out. Now, I would also add to that nothing has been settled yet, right? So I do think this is very important. I think this may very well be a turning point. In fact, I've argued it's a turning point already. I may be proven wrong still in the future, because obviously this is just the beginning, presumably the beginning of a process of rapprochement, of negotiations between Moscow and Washington about not only the Ukraine conflict, but as you have pointed out, there are a lot of other topics in the room. And in fact, we know that the Russian side as well has long demanded a much more general resetting of relationships with the United States in particular, but also with the West as a whole. So on both sides, if they can manage to actually close down the Ukraine conflict, there may be a willingness to go further and do more, right? But I repeat, we don't know if this will happen. We don't know if this will work out. Today or yesterday, I think J.D. Vance, the vice president, has given an interview in which he has made fairly aggressive noises again toward Russia, right? And when you listen to that interview or look at that interview, you feel that he's almost threatening to bring American troops perhaps into Ukraine, which we thought were long off the table, right? He's talking again about escalating sanctions if the Russians don't do as the Americans want them to, that sort of talk. I personally think this is a negotiating trick. I think that the Trump administration as a whole has gotten cold feet because Trump went out with a lot of concessions to Russia up front, and so did the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, right, speaking in Munich. And so I think this Vance thing, I think they weren't very coordinated. They realized they gave too much away at the beginning of the game with the Russians, and so Vance was sent in to play the bad cop, right?
Yes.
But ultimately, I think they actually want a solution. Again, I may be wrong, obviously, right?
But is it possible to pursue diplomatic solution with Russia without Europe? And
yes.
Yeah, so
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Lots of noise coming from European leaders nowadays, and the
Yeah.
objections are very clear. Like
Yeah.
it seems that they're going to try to put stick in the wheels.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Well, they have no sticks left, right? That's the problem. You can make a lot of noise if you've deprived yourself of all the leverage you could have
Mm,
had, right? So here's the irony. The Europeans, the NATO EU Europeans, with very few exceptions, like Orban and Fico, who couldn't change things, the Europeans have done everything for years to become totally powerless tools of the Americans.
mm,
And now the Americans are changing course. And I don't see the Europeans having any leverage left in this. They are dependent, they're defenseless without the Americans. Um, Moscow and Washington, if they want, can settle this on their own and they can freeze the Europeans out. They have that capacity now. Now, you get Kaya Kallas, right? Even smarter than Annalena Baerbock. Yes, I'm being ironic. You get Kaya Kallas coming out, Mike, like trumpets blaring and saying, oh man, if the Ukrainians don't like the deal that Washington and Moscow are going to do, then we, the Europeans, will support the Ukrainians.
yes.
Really, Kaya? Really? You have nothing to do that with
Mm,
without the Americans. You have nothing. And that's the truth. This is an empty bluff. It's worse than a bluff because it's transparently empty. So the
mm,
Europeans have themselves to blame for this. They have themselves to blame. If in the years before they had shown more of a spine and shown more of an independent position, then they would still have leverage with the Americans,
mm,
right? Remember Schroeder and
yes.
Chirac during Gulf War One, 2003.
Yes.
I hope I'm not wrong about the year.
You are.
They couldn't stop it, but they
Mm,
did have some leverage. They got a
mm,
lot of crap from the Americans for that, But ultimately, this was the better policy because they also still had some respect. Now we are dealing with Europeans who have followed the Washington lead in lockstep. And not only that, don't forget Nord Stream. Nord Stream was very, very important because
indeed.
Nord Stream was the moment when the
Indeed.
Americans and or the Ukrainians together
Mm,
tested just how far they could go. Nord
mm,
Stream was a barely covert act of war against their NATO allies. It was a massive eco-terrorist attack, the biggest in European history. Actually, literally, you can measure that. And the Europeans caved totally. They helped with the cover up and they kept supporting the US and they kept supporting Ukraine. I mean, call it geopolitical masochism. It doesn't get worse than that. So when you have that record, who are they trying to impress? There's nothing left. There's nothing left there. And the same is, by the way, true for the British. Starmer, once again promising Zelensky, we are going to be with you forever. Yeah, into the abyss.
mm,
Because Britain as well cannot do anything without the United States.
yeah.
They're basically now getting the receipts, they're getting the reckoning for becoming so weak and such underlings.
Isn't it interesting that such a meeting could happen in Saudi Arabia and not in one of the European countries?
Right?
Like he could have picked Budapest, for example, or
Yeah, they could have done the Geneva thing. No, I mean, Switzerland always works. No,
yeah,
no, 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 no. No, that is also a very clear signal.
yeah,
Whoever finally shaped that decision, because don't forget, the Russians are in this as well, right?
mm,
Here's the thing. I mean, the tragic lesson of this is Russia has resisted the Americans to the point of fighting a fairly desperate war,
yes,
which could have gone wrong. It could have gone badly wrong. They had to take a huge risk to do this. They've come out and they've won,
mm,
right? Let's be very clear here. The historic significance of this moment already is that Russia has won a war against the West. I'm not
yes,
kidding you. This is what happened here, right? Not World War III. Thank God we didn't do that. But yes, a war against the West. And the West has been committed so heavily in terms of money, in terms of economic losses, in terms of arms, intelligence, unofficial troops, black ops, you name it. Nobody in the world looks at this and says, oh, this is just Ukraine being defeated.
mm,
Everybody in the world, every observer in the world who isn't completely brainwashed understands Russia has defeated the West. It's a limited war, but it was a big war nevertheless, and Russia has won. This is a huge geopolitical fact that the Russians know it, right? So the interesting thing is Russia now has leverage. The Americans have to make concessions to Russia. That's what's happening here, right? Trump will never admit that, right? But that's what's happening here. The Europeans, who have always obeyed, have no leverage. And this is, of course, the nature of the shark pool that is international politics. If you make yourself very small and go into a fetal position and let everybody kick you, you're done for. The Russians did the opposite. That's what the Europeans did. And now it's over. No more leverage.
Yeah. I mean, as an outside observer, now that I see Russia and the United States will once again negotiate, it sends also a signal that Russia still respects the US as a superpower,
Yes.
and they want to compromise
Yes.
with the United States, which is a logical, rational thing to
Yes.
do.
Yes.
Unlike with Europe, as you mentioned, it seems that the Russians lost the respect itself
They
as
have.
well. We're not only
They have.
talking about now balance of power
You're
and
right.
geopolitics,
Yeah.
but in the Russian nature, like losing respect for an entire elite in Europe that you
They
see,
have.
except for 2-3
Yeah.
countries,
No.
it is difficult even on a character level to deal with someone like Kaya Kallas, for example. Who is going to sit with Kaya Kallas on the Russian side? You know what I mean? Like from the Russian point of view, it's difficult for them to sit with someone like Kaya Kallas. And they knew it. Like this was a transitional period. Also, Trump is coming.
Yeah.
The smarter thing to do was to put
Yeah.
someone in this position who is more leaning toward diplomacy instead of appointing someone or selecting someone who is, I would say, arrogantly and stubbornly against diplomacy
And who's an
with
idiot?
Russia.
I'm sorry, let's be very clear. Kaya Kallas is a perfect incompetent. There's no there. Absolutely not. I mean, I don't know who's worse, Baerbock or Kallas, but wow. Josep Borrell was not great. Definitely not, right? I know he had formal training, but sorry, in the real world, he was really not smart. Josep Borrell was pretty bad. But
Yes.
Kallas is a total catastrophe. It's like a nincompoop. It's like the European Union has shown the world we want incompetence. That's
Yes.
what we want. That's what we promote. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. It's
I
absolutely
think
ridiculous.
I think this type of selections in this type of positions is also sending signals to places outside the
Of
Western
course.
Hemisphere. Like I always tell
Of
myself this
course.
example, and I say, if you close your eyes nowadays, Tariq, and put the map in front of you, Middle East and North Africa, that they call them the jungle and the backward people, just close your eyes and put a finger on any country
Yeah.
and bring the foreign minister of this country with the foreign ministers or the Kaya Kalasas
Yeah.
that you mentioned, and just test them the IQ and
That's
test for the diplomatic at least knowledge.
yeah.
There is a vast difference,
Yes.
and this is not
Yes.
only something that is exclusive to Russia, but also diplomats in outside the Western
They see
Hemisphere
it.
are also suffering from this.
They see it.
Now, I will show you a few videos. Let's comment on these videos. Let's start with the first one with Donald Trump. He has made lots of controversial statements for the Europeans this week. So the reporter asked, do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process? Let's see what he has to say.
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace.
It's a no.
So no.
People are being killed, and I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
So he doesn't answer if Ukraine is an
Well,
equal.
like any other politician. Let's be fair to him there. He's not particularly evasive. That's what they do, right?
I mean, but excluding Ukraine from the negotiations, I've seen
Good.
since
Good thing.
yesterday. Yeah, but since yesterday, I've seen many comments, let's say on X,
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
people that and
Yeah.
they are very influential in Ukraine, and they have
Yeah.
been pushed for quite a long time
Mhm.
on mainstream media outlets, including some people living here in Germany, in Berlin. and you feel shock and the desperation. And one of the commentators said, the profile is I think Kai from or Jay from Kiev, that the US is no longer a European ally.
It's not.
Yeah,
it's never been an ally for a long time. The US is the boss, right? To think of, if you're European, right? Even if you're NATO and you think the US is your ally, it's like the owner of a restaurant under control of the Soprano clan, and you think Tony Soprano is your ally. Tony Soprano is not your ally. Tony Soprano is the crime boss who has you under his boot. Right? That's not an ally. I'm sorry. And you are not Tony Soprano's ally. You are Tony Soprano's vessel. That's the right term here. We are not allies. We are not allies. And one reason why Europe isn't an ally of the US, one reason is the US is like that. It's a very brutal power. But the other reason is, to be an ally, you have to secure, once again, a certain degree of power and leverage yourself. Because if you don't have that, the other doesn't have to treat you as an ally. The other will make you into, at best, a client and at worst, a vessel. That's what you get for having no power, right? Now, here's the other thing. Look, back to your original point, which is, will they do this without Ukraine? I think regarding both the Europeans and the Ukrainians, I can imagine that there will be cosmetic adjustments, where a pretense, a facade, a Potemkin village will be erected, in which those who are naive enough will be allowed to believe that the Europeans and the Ukrainians had a say. But the reality is, if this process does go down, and if it leads to a result, a peace, then it will happen without Europe and without Ukraine having substantial input, right? So yes, it's without. Now, concerning the Europeans, I'm glad they're out, and they should be out, because if they're in, we won't get to peace, and I want peace. Concerning the Ukrainians, it's a bit more complicated, and I understand that a lot of people, I'm sorry, aren't realistic enough to see clearly on this, because this whole thing about nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine has always been a lie. It has never been true, never. It has always been a smokescreen for the West to conduct a proxy war at the cost of hundreds of thousands, at least, of Ukrainian lives, and much, much more than that, and pretend that this is what the Ukrainians want. It's a lie. It's always been a lie. Now, the second point is, and I've raised this very early in this war, when Ukraine, this is a different point, when Ukraine takes on board support from, say, Germany, France, US, Britain, you name it, then all of these countries have a stake in the war. And if you take that sort of support, you cannot say, I'm the only one who decides on the peace anymore. If you want to be the only government deciding when to make peace, don't take on support, fight alone. Then you get all the decision-making to yourself. But a situation which one has brainwashed Western publics into believing is normal, where we are all engaged in this war, but only in Kiev, allegedly, they can decide when to stop it, is perverse, completely perverse, intellectually and morally. That's point two. And point number three is, of course, that when people talk about Ukraine, Ukraine must have a say. Who's Ukraine? Who is Ukraine? Is Ukraine the next unwilling recruit who is being dragged into one of these idiotic buses to be shipped to the front as cannon fodder? Are his parents Ukraine? Is that Ukraine? I think that's more Ukraine than Zelensky and his criminal crew. And we have seen for almost a year out of Ukraine, reliable opinion polls that have shown us that the number of Ukrainians who, even under the authoritarian Zelensky regime, are now willing to say that they want an end to this war at the cost of a compromise with Russia is rising, rising, rising. So this whole story about Ukraine has to have a say, who is that? Zelensky? Zelensky isn't Ukraine. I don't accept that. Absolutely not. Apart from the minor question that he did overstay his mandate and it's actually illegitimate. I know Putin says this, but you know what? Putin is right on this. The Ukrainian constitution doesn't allow Zelensky to be in power anymore, actually. So this whole spiel, this whole romanticizing, hypocritical spiel about you can't do anything about the Ukrainians without the Ukrainians has only served to sacrifice this country. That's all it has served. It's one big lie, and it's good if it's over.
Wow, man! Like it's hard. Like it hurts you from inside that the
It does.
Ukrainians had to go through all this,
Yeah.
you know, because this was
Yeah.
clear cut. Like in 2022, how many
Yeah.
times
Yeah.
how many times people who called for signing the peace treaty
They were
between Russia
used.
and Ukraine were
They have been
accused?
used.
Yeah, the Ukrainians have been used. Now it's quite clear. And to be honest with you, I've seen countless of demonstrations here for Ukraine, and mostly were, of course, non-Ukrainians. And there was a big, of course, women participation from the liberal movements here, that we have to send the Leopards, we have to send the howitzers, we have to send all the game changer weapons, because nobody understood what war is about. The war is not the tanks. It's not it's not about its soldiers. You need boots on the ground. You need willing people to fight. You need trenches. You need fortifications. You need artilleries, and you need production, and you need repair. Like, this is what war is about. If your equipment is damaged, you need spare parts. You need people know how to operate this weaponry. You can't just give a weapon to Ukraine if the soldiers do not know how to use. And in order to get the training, you need months and months and months of training. Like the F-16 is not something you can sit and fly. No, you would need at least a year of training, and you know. So
Absolutely.
all the balance of power in terms of the experience, the weapons, the skills, and the training, and everything, also production of the artilleries. Russia is producing 3 times more than the entire collective West. So, like, it's mathematics, you know. Sometimes it doesn't need a genius to understand what's happening in Ukraine is basically sending all these young Ukrainians to their imminent death. And we were not we were not telling these things to the people because we wanted for Russia to win, because if we wanted for Russia to win, we would have asked for Russia to continue the war until now, because they're winning this war and they could occupy entire Ukraine. But we were the people calling for diplomacy from the February of 2022 and saying that this will keep Ukrainians their territories for themselves.
But
and
what you are saying has been tested, right?
Yeah.
It's not just me and you saying it. It's been tested because there was the almost peace of Istanbul in March 2022. Basically, a little more than a month then after the start of the war, when almost all the damage hadn't happened yet. It was bad, but it was nothing compared with now. And they almost got to peace. And we know about this peace, that at that point, and the Ukrainians have now, the Ukrainian leadership has acknowledged this incautiously, that the Russians gave them a very good deal at that point, right? Why was that? Well, partly it was because the Russians, actually, believe it or not, are not these bloodthirsty monsters. They have been in this in pursuit of a very important political and security goal. And frankly, I think the West left them no choice. But they were not in this to destroy Ukraine per se. They would have been happy ending this quickly with a decent peace. And they were happy to do this in the spring of 22. But the other reason why this was still a good offer was that at that point, Ukraine still had more leverage, simply because it was less used up, right? It was less defeated, right? And because the Russians also didn't know the future. They didn't know in spring 2022 how strong they would get. They didn't know how well they would deal with our economic warfare. All of these things the Russians didn't know yet. So that was a moment when you can really prove that if you make a negotiated peace earlier, you get a better peace because you're still stronger, right? And your opponent has more reasons to give you stuff, right, in the peace. And this has been true from then until now. Again and again, people like you and me have explained to people and many others, you need to negotiate now before you have nothing left. And now there's almost nothing left.
Yes, I think there is nothing left, and now Trump is even asking for the earth minerals in
Of
exchange
course.
for any aid. So we have an entire generation of young men have been murdered in
They're
Ukraine.
gone.
So you know the demographics in one generation, what is going to happen in Ukraine. Secondly, you have
Yeah.
economy is in tatters. You have demographics, you have economy, and now any hope for recovery for Ukraine, which means the minerals that they need probably to sell and make money and reconstruct
It's
their
one big
country is
factor.
also gone. And now we have big bankers. We have the BlackRock and Vanguard are coming and investing in the territory and probably also in the
And the
farms and the
land,
land. Yeah,
probably
so
matching that up.
Ukraine has become a multinational corporation now, and this is like a globalist
Correct.
agenda to own an entire country for
It's
themselves,
not
right?
even a multinational corporation.
Mm.
It's a colony now.
Mm.
It's a colony with various vultures, and they're all getting a piece of what's left. That's what's happening. And you know, these rare earth things in particular, everybody has been going on for a week or 10 days and saying, oh, you know, Ukraine has the rare earths and the Americans want them. So the implication was, and Zelensky himself went on TV and did a big show about this, that, yeah, here's our stuff, you know, here are all our raw materials in the ground. And then we can actually get Trump to basically help us that way. No, they can't. And the reason is that a lot of the most important sites are already under Russian control. So I don't know this at all, but here's a guess. What do you think are the Russians and the Americans also talking about right now? They are talking, among other things, about how Russia will give access to American companies to these sites, maybe in the form of joint ventures, right?
Yeah.
But it won't actually involve Ukraine anymore because Russia has this territory now and it will keep it.
Yes. Wow. I will show you a second clip for Trump, and this time the reporter asks, do you see any future in which Ukraine returns to its pre-2014 borders?
Sir, just to be clear, do you see any future in which Ukraine returns to its pre-2014 borders?
Well, I think Pete said today that that's unlikely, right? It certainly would seem to be unlikely. They took a lot of land and they fought land and they lost a lot of soldiers. But it would just seem to me, and I'm not making an opinion on it, but I've read a lot on it, and a lot of people think that that's unlikely. Some of it will come back. I think some of it will come back. Yeah, some of that land will come back.
It sounds like an opinion here, and it hurts. This opinion hurts. Like it look on the outlook, it sounds like people are now like, oh, you see, we told you Trump is a Russian agent. You know, like he's basically justifying that Russians have lost lots
He
of.
may be an Israeli agent, right? That's much more realistic. But no, I'm serious. I mean, if anything, it's an Israeli agent, but not a Russian one. Absolutely.
Yeah, but the Ukrainians would say, yeah, the Russians lost a lot of soldiers to conquer this land, but we also lost hundreds of thousands of people to keep this land, right?
Look, in principle, right? In principle, if we zoom out, to say we lost soldiers to conquer territory is not a valid argument nowadays. In principle, But we all know that in the real world, things like that still do matter. That's just the way it is, right? The Russians have fought this war initially because the West was not ready to finally stop the expansion of NATO. This is reason number one. And the Ukrainian regime made the enormous mistake to actually tilt massively west instead of staying in the middle, which would have secured it. It's not an easy place, but it's better than a war. And they completely messed that up. That is no reason to be beaten up like this, but that's the way international politics works. Sorry for everybody. Now, this is why this war happened. Now, then the Russians ended up with territory taken. And fairly early in the war, they started formulating ambitious goals, like we want these 4 oblasts, all of them. And you know what? When they say pre-2014, that also officially includes Crimea. And everybody who's not a total brain-dead dolt has known for a long time that Crimea is gone for Ukraine, right? So Crimea, we are not even talking about this. No serious person is talking about Crimea going back now. What we are really talking about is how much else Russia will take now, right? That's the real question in the east, north of Crimea, of Ukraine. So
Yes.
I don't know what the ultimate outcome will be, but I think that both Hegseth and Trump are serious about being ready to let the Russians take significant additional territory beyond Ukraine, beyond Crimea, out of what was Ukrainian before the crisis of spring 2014, right? That I think will also happen. And I think this is what, for instance, the mayor of Kiev, the ex-boxer Klitschko, was referring to when he came out about 3-5 days ago and said, bad stuff is coming, essentially. It could be very disappointing. Some very hard stuff is coming. I think he had heard rumors of what we are
Yes.
seeing now. I think he had heard internal rumors of what the Americans were at that stage preparing to release. And now they've done it, right? So the territorial losses for Ukraine, I think, are certain. They're certain to be significantly more than Crimea now. The question, how much exactly, we don't know. But again, it's a harsh outcome, and it could have been prevented.
Yes. I just want to answer to a friend. We started half an hour ago, yes, because at the beginning of this live stream, I mentioned that I miscalculated the time difference between me and Tarek. And Tarek has other scheduled things to do. So I had to start a little bit early. This was my mistake, not his mistake. So I had to start a little bit early. And this is the statement that Tarek is referring to, I believe. So this is the defense minister of the United States, Pete Hegseth, and this is what he said.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, not covered under Article 5.
Yeah.
There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
So, European troops, no Article 5, which means if a European troops got killed, it's not the responsibility of the United States.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Packs a punch, doesn't it?
Wow.
Yeah, look, basically, if this model actually becomes reality, which I don't know if it will, but if this were to become reality, essentially the US would succeed in Europeanizing the war entirely, right? So the Europeans would be out there on a limb, right? Ready for Russia to tweak them down a notch or 2 or 3, right? Settle some old accounts. And the US has already said, hey, this isn't NATO. This doesn't concern us. So look, if the European leaderships in Berlin and London, Paris, you name it, if they were still halfway sane, then I would say to you, this will never happen. This is such an obvious, insane trap. Nobody would walk into that. But then again, we are dealing with Baerbocks, Macrons, Starmers, Lemmies, right? They might actually do it.
Let me just wait for Tarek's internet to be corrected. It seems that he is having a problem. If you're Tarek, okay, let me see. So I think you're back now. Let me see.
Muted my mic. Did you mute it by accident?
Tarek, if you are listening to me, I think there is a problem with your internet. We lost you and lost your. It also seems something is happening. Like this stream is being hacked or something. I think there is something happening with my the stream. Let's see if Tarek is back.
Can you hear me?
Not yet. We cannot hear you. Like I think you have to log out and come back again. That would be better.
Can you hear me now?
I will mute him. So I think it's better for him to jump out and come back, and let's see how. All of a sudden, the stream started to glitch, and something started to happen with this live streaming. I don't think there are outside forces trying to sabotage this live streaming, but it was strange that mine and his stream all of a sudden started to lag. Tarik is fine. It's at your end, Kevork. Yeah, maybe it's on my end. I'm not sure because my internet looks good. Everything looks perfect on my side. We will see if Tarik is back. Tarik is back, and the internet is great again. Make this internet great again.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I do. I
Good,
do
good.
hear you. There was some glitch. It
I don't
seems
know.
some outside hands intervened in our stream. You were dropping too many
I
truth
shouldn't have said
bombs.
this thing about an Israeli agent, right? That was too much.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, yeah.
You crossed the line. You crossed the line. Now, I'm sure that you love Kaya Kallas a lot, which he disagrees with you on this security guarantees for Ukraine, because we were speaking about Pete's opinion about the NATO membership. And this is her response, basically, to the United States.
Membership in NATO is the strongest security guarantee there is, and actually it's also the cheapest security guarantee there is. If we
Yeah,
are
for
saying,
Estonia, I know.
it's not going to be NATO membership, but it's going to be some other security guarantees, then the question needs to be answered by everybody. What are these security guarantees really? Again, I would say that, we shouldn't take anything off the table before the negotiations have even started, because it plays to Russia's court and it is what they want. Why are we giving them everything that they want even before the negotiations have been started? It's appeasement. It has never worked.
Oh, appeasement. Yeah. Listen, look, I'm sorry, Kevork, what can we say, right? First of all, she doesn't decide what goes on the table or goes off the table. She hasn't noticed this yet, but it's not her call. Absolutely not. The discussions about what should be on the table, off the table, on the side of the West, you know where they take place? In Washington, right? They take place maybe between Hexas and Trump and Waltz and maybe Kellogg and maybe the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who has recently piped up, I forgot his name, Roger something. These internal forces inside Washington, they might still be having a discussion. Kallas, you don't even have a voice. Forget it. You don't decide anything about any tables anymore. It's over. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, NATO is not a good security guarantee, because for Russia, NATO is a red rag. And when you on Russia's border, as Ukraine is, and you are a former Soviet republic and you are a former Slavonic Soviet republic, and they don't make for you the generous exception they made for the Baltics, which is a very special case, then joining NATO is inviting them to attack you. Exactly as the attempt to talk about NATO was an invitation to attack Georgia in August 2008, because Russia will not accept this type of security threat on its border. And yes, it's a threat. And yes, all states that are powerful enough act like this, all of them. It's been said again and again. But if the Russians tried to make a special alliance with Mexico and put some bases there, you would see what would happen, right? This is nothing unusual. You don't park the single most powerful military alliance of the world right on the doorsteps of Russia, and then you say, oh my God, something happened. That's idiotic. It's moronic. We've had enough of this. Because in international relations, it's not about what people say. It's about what they could do. This has been taught to us by the realists forever. It's not declared intentions, it's capabilities. So it doesn't matter if a Stoltenberg or a Rutte or some other hollow-brained NATO figurehead repeats that NATO is a defensive alliance, we would never do anything bad to you. First of all, we know it's not true from recent history. And second, it doesn't matter in international politics because you don't believe stuff like that. You look at what the other could do to you. That's what you do. It's called capabilities. Therefore, the whole idea of securing Ukraine through bringing it into NATO's vicinity even was always insane. It was an idea that exposed Ukraine like hell, and it is at the root of this war. And even more of this won't help. Now let's talk about how you could actually secure Ukraine, how you could give what will be left of Ukraine real security guarantees. Here's the hard answer. After this war, they are no longer available. That's the truth. You can't fix something absolute for Ukraine anymore. There will always be ambiguity for a long time. It will always be a tense situation. You can get to peace, but you won't have really well-working guarantees anymore. We messed that up. It's over. Now, what you could do, you could be realistic and think about what reduces the risk of another war to the minimum I can get to. And one way you do this is neutrality. That is, you signal to the Russians the opposite of what they've signaled until now, which is there is no threat here. Everything is fine. You have no reason to waste resources on a big war. That's one way you can do it. That's one way. This whole thing, like you can pack a lot of deterrent power into Ukraine, and that will then keep the Russians out. It's a recipe for disaster. It's just been tried. It's just been tried.
There is another.
These idiots. There's nothing in the right place in these brains.
But you know, Tarik, this is also about mentality. This is also like an ideological stance vis-a-vis Russia. And
Yes.
I keep hearing about geopolitics or economy or finances, etc. But there is the factor of ideology. It seems playing a big role now in the minds of the politicians in Europe specifically against Russia, because it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not European, I'm not Russian, I'm not Ukrainian, which means I don't have a bread in this conflict, right? And my focus is on my region in the Middle East, but I don't want for the Ukrainians to suffer like the Syrians suffered. So I was giving what I don't want to even call it an advice, but this is what my opinion is coming from, because I didn't want for the Ukrainians to suffer like with it in Syria. But you need to have politicians in Europe also helping Ukraine, because they're clearly not. And this is not. And when I try to analyze a statement or analyze a position or policy of any country, it has to make sense to me to understand. But when it doesn't make sense, it means there is an ideology at play, because at so many times during history, empires fell because of an ideological position or a personal grievance, let's say, against the enemy. And in this case, it's Russia. And Russia is not playing in an, let's say, in a way that shows that their war is based on hatred against the West. They're telling very clearly, this is the boundary of our war. This is what we are trying to secure, and very clearly we are going to achieve it by 1, 2, 3. But on the other side, they are talking about unrealistic goals, like support Ukraine as long as it takes, and Ukraine can win this war against Russia. Those are fantasies, which means it's not based on solid policy that stands on the interests of the country, of the nation of Ukraine and the European countries. This is why I say this is a complete failure for the strategy, because it's not a strategy. It's like you're dealing with a child, like it's a child mindset.
Yes, Europe is a toddler figure now. It's amazing. They're just having a tantrum. And the Ukrainians are dying for it, and their country is being destroyed for it. Look, if Europe wanted to help Ukraine, if they sincerely wanted to help the Ukrainians, what they would have to do, I don't know exactly what they would have to do, but one thing they would have to do is actually turn to Russia and say, we get rid of the sanctions. We will reestablish normal economic relationships between all of us. And while we do this, we will bind Ukraine into these normal relationships. And when you go back to one of the very early stages of this cluster mess we are in now, right? That was one of the questions about the EU association agreement. Remember that one in 2013. It was that the EU said, if you associate with us, Ukraine, you cannot associate with the Russians anymore, economically. We were talking just about economics then, right? At least superficially. The Russians were saying at the same time, you know what, your EU association, we can actually live with that. That's how reasonable they were. But we must find a way that Ukraine can stay open economically to both of us, right? And the EU absolutely said no to it. It was one of these first idiotic no's from the West to the Russians. Now, we actually might want to go back to that. And we may have to say to the Russians, this is what we could really do as Europeans for Ukraine. You know what? We are revising that. We want your investments in what is left of Ukraine, and we will have our investments, and somehow we will open the space to all of our economic activity. Now, Russia and Ukraine have, in this scenario, just been in a horrible war, so it's going to be very difficult. There might be a lot of very bad feelings in play for a while. But you know what? It's probably the way forward. And because it's a good way forward, I'm pretty sure nobody will take it. Because that's not what Europe does anymore. It doesn't look for constructive solutions.
Yes. One of our commentators says, sure, but listen to the Dugin guy. He wants to bring back the Russian Empire. And I would like to say,
Who's
if you
Dugin?
listen, this
Who's
is what I
Dugin?
wanted to.
Is he the
Who's Dugin?
president? He's not the president. He's not.
I mean, he's not even in the fifth level of the people close to the
Can I
Kremlin,
give
you
a
know?
comparison? Can I give a comparison?
Yeah.
So we look at Dugin, who is, an intellectual, a geopolitical thinker. You can be angry with Dugin. You can, if you want, you can classify him as a fascist. I don't care. That's not my issue. But Dugin is not the government at all and has never been. And if Andreas Umland has told you this, you've been lied to massively. It's disinformation. Now, I can give you a figure in the West with very strange ideas who has actual government office and very high, Kaja Kallas. Kaja Kallas, the de facto foreign minister of the whole European Union, was sitting at a conference just about a year ago or so, I think in Estonia. There's a record of this. And literally saying into the camera, hey, what's so bad if Russia falls apart? What's so bad if Russia is broken up into many small countries? She was literally threatening the basic territorial integrity of that state. That's a casus belli, by the way, not only for Russians. And that figure, not some Dugin, not some philosopher, that figure is actually the de facto foreign minister of the EU. So if you're looking for somebody who says outrageous things that are bad for the peace, Kaja Kallas is your woman, not Dugin. I've had it.
And I would like to say Dugin has done really disservice to himself for not denying that he's the brain behind Putin. I mean, the entire Western press was like, Dugin is the brain of Putin, and he didn't deny these allegations. And I'm not saying that this is a direct correlation, but this has accumulated, and there was a clear hatred in Ukraine, basically against him.
It might have to do with the terrible thing he did to his daughter.
Yes, to her daughter. Her daughter got killed because of him, right?
Assassinated, murdered by Ukrainian secret agents. That was a murder. That was a clear-cut murder. That was not war. Let's be very clear about what happened to Daria Dugin. I don't know her. I'm not a fan of her father. It doesn't interest me. I don't like nationalists in general. But what was done to Daria Dugin was murder. That wasn't war. It was terrorism.
And unjustified. I mean, she doesn't have any military role in anything. No. She was a podcaster. She was talking like killing me because I had an opinion that you don't like.
Yeah. By the way, something else. If you want to know the brain of Putin, the brain behind Putin, I have a really hot tip for you. It's Putin. It's Putin. This whole stupid fairy tale that people like Marsha Gessen have told the West, that Putin is like a nobody, a gray blot. There's nothing in there. He just consists of what other people have to say to him. That's idiotic. That's idiotic. I know Russian. I can read what he writes or publishes or has written for him, but that's normal for a politician. I can hear it and understand it when he gives long, coherent interviews. You can like him, you can dislike him, but that guy is not a puppet and he's not a gray blot. He's not a non-entity. If you want to understand Putin, you better focus on Putin. That's it.
Yes, and he's telling you what he wants in Ukraine very clearly and
very often.
precisely, and the military operations on the ground clearly indicates that they're following these orders for the exact precise goals that they have set up for themselves. Tarik, I just want to ask you, do you have 10 more minutes or you want to wrap up? Because it's already
5 to 10, right?
5 minutes. Okay, just two more things and we wrap up quickly. Trump proposing trilateral agreement with China and Russia to mutually draw down military budgets by 50%. He said one of the first meetings I want to have with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia, and I want to say, let's cut our military budgets in half. Is this rhetorical thing, or is it expected to engage in such negotiations?
That I don't know. You know, I give Trump one thing. There are many reasons why I don't like Trump at all. One is I'm a socialist, he's a fascist. The other is he's a very rich capitalist. And then the third one is, and the worst, the one I really can't tolerate. I can actually almost tolerate the others. I can't tolerate the way that he also, like Biden, is co-perpetrating genocide together with Israel. So I have no special liking for Trump, but I give him one thing, which is, like Putin, do not underestimate Trump. He's his own man. And you may not like the way he formulates things. You may take offense at the fact that he's often very ignorant, which is true, but he has his own mind, and you better take care of that. So I think it could be real. I think that, like Ronald Reagan, we've actually seen this before with a very conservative president. Reagan had a serious interest in getting rid of all nuclear weapons. It didn't happen, but it was serious, right? At the end, right, towards the end, not at the beginning of his tenure. But so I think it's possible that Trump, as a businessman, really looks at this and says, look, nobody needs so many arms. Yes. The problem is something else. If he is serious about this idea that he only wants to slash if China and Russia slash in the same way, it will never work. Yes. And the reason is very simple. They have much less to begin with. So if they slash by 50%, that is really dangerous for them. They are not overspending the way the Americans are. He has a lot to slash. So if he insists on this symmetry, on this pseudo-symmetry, it can't fly. Yes. Right? That's important.
Guys, before I ask him the last question, I just want to mention quickly that the X account of Tarik is in the description below, and most importantly, his Substack is also in the description below. You can follow and read his analysis and publications, which he is doing regularly. So if you're on Substack, I would really appreciate it if you also hit him a follow. I will just show you last opinion by Pepe Escobar. He said something about this, what's happening nowadays. He says Trump's strategy is totally transparent. First, declare BRICS is dead. Bring Russia back to the G7, G8 all over again. Split Russia from China. The top two BRICS, not gonna happen.
Yeah. Look, I agree with him on one thing, with Pepe Escobar, which is, if that is really the American idea, it will not happen. The Russians, the Chinese, other powers, the Iranians, the Saudis, Brazil, South Africa, they're not going to give up BRICS. That ship has sailed. This idea that we can just open the door back to the G7, then 8, and then Russia is going to give up on all this stuff, it's over. It's done. And even more so for the Chinese-Russian de facto alliance. If anybody thinks they can do another Kissinger-Nixon, where they schmooze with one of them and then they split them from each other, Christ, people, you're so transparent. The Chinese and the Russians see all of this, and they will never do it because they've learned their lesson. They know that the USA only splits you up so it can take you on and devastate you separately, and they will not allow this to happen. That's not going to fly.
So this was a great way to end up our conversation today with Dr. Tarik Cyril Amar. Thank you so much, my friend, for coming and sharing your insight and analysis and wisdom, especially to the European leaders. If they're listening, that would be amazing.
I hope so.
Yeah. And I would like to thank all the people who watch this live and those who will watch later. Guys, if you like this content, just thumbs up subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you want to do more, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. If you don't like to use Patreon, there are other means in the description below, and we will see each other again on Monday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families, and peace be upon you, Tarik. Salam.
Bye-bye.